Discuss Art. I am your host, Rob Lee. And today, my guest is a neurodivergent queer artist of color and owner of the If I Knew Then Letters project. Please welcome Alyssa Fenix. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for popping on. And, in going into, it's not a torture chamber. I was going to say the torture chamber that is this podcast, but it's not that. It's always really fun and light and conversational. But before we get too deep into the fun, I want you to share your story. And if you could highlight the first experience that you had, like working with art and knowing that art was something you wanted to spend a fair amount of your life and your time toward.
Oh, that's like always a good interview question, right? Like try to sum it all up as much as you can. The imposter syndrome in me wants to say like, no, pick another book. You don't need the Alyssa Fenix story. All right. So basics, born and raised in Maryland. I'm Black, I'm queer, neurodivergent. I live in Baltimore with my 2 kids and my partner and my dog, and probably more plants than I even care to admit. A lot of my educational background is special ed, psychology, queer studies. I like to say I'm a certified lesbian. It's kind of my claim to fame. And I was mostly in education just up until this last year, which is actually probably the first time I really owned the title of being an artist, which is really bizarre at 38 years old to kind of just suddenly feel like I can say that. But I think everything kind of masked it underneath that. So as far as my experience with art, I think, back when I was a kid, I used to spend a lot of summers with my Aunt Jean in Virginia, and she used to teach me all these kind of crafts and sewing, and it was usually out of all those hoarded craft supplies that now I've taken on, myself, and just kind of started making just random shit. And between that and then she would buy me one of those multi-packs of the disposable cameras. Yeah. And then she would take me to random or just to close parks and everything because she knew I loved just the way the trees reflected on the water. So I think at 9, when she would start doing that, is when I really started to kind of think about art in a way that, and as something that fills my cup. So I think that was kind of my my initial experience. I've kind of dabbled here and there, but I'm sure we'll get into that too.
Yeah. Thank you for walking us through that a little bit. Mm-hmm. It's always interesting to hear when people say, yeah, this is when I realized, that looking back on it. And it's funny when someone's like, yeah, I had this really interesting sandwich. And it's like, oh, what? It's like you saw art in that, but it's interesting to see where people kind of have that reference point, I suppose. Mm-hmm. So could you share a life experience that helped shape your creative sensibility? Because I think, there are many things that pop up or what have you. Like someone may say, I'm a hard worker and I really put that towards my work. For instance, for me, in this month where we're recording, I'm never a person that really gets sick and miss time. So with it, I have a day job, like a lot of us do. And I'm somehow doing 45 interviews this month. So, that's just, I grew up and that was kind of hard work. This is what you do. And I would say that that's something that shaped me as a creative and as a person. Right.
Absolutely. And trying to fit it in where you can and just knowing that that's what sustains you. Right.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Again, one of those narrowing it down questions. I got to say, given the fact that I only probably recently gave myself permission to kind of adhere to somewhat of an identity, I would say about this time last year, I was doing some research for a contract that I was doing. I do a lot of professional development and everything through my diversity LLC that I have. And I was doing some looking at diagnostic criteria and some of the biases in terms of access and all of that fun stuff around neurodivergence and gender identity. And as I started taking some of these questionnaires myself, I realized all of the ones are related to autism spectrum disorder were coming up as highly likely. So I decided to go through an assessment myself, and it turns out I'm very much on the spectrum. And with a background of, 12 years in teaching special education, all that kind of stuff, it is something that I think just never had occurred to me.
Sure.
And I think the more that is coming out in terms of how it presents in different populations and just what some of the actual symptoms and observable traits are, it's like me to a T. And for me, I feel like it actually kind of unpacked this weird arbitrary rubric that I had on my identity. There were like all these like sets of rules that I somehow gave myself, where I was like, well, I can't be an artist because I technically never formally trained, right? Or I can't be a person of color or I can't be Black because I technically am only a percentage of, like there were all these weird rules that I gave myself. And I think that kind of gave a lot of light as to how I viewed the world.
Yeah.
And so then when it came to art and just that I use that as a form of self-expression, that kind of unlocked a freedom, I think, in my creating things, because I didn't give myself the same rules, the same parameters. I didn't look at other artists as like threats or things that like I would never live up to, because I realized it ain't about them. Like it's never been about them. It's about me and how I'm connecting with the world. So that kind of like loosened the reins and actually like opened up a lot of possibilities for me. I think since then, I also left my full-time job in education and started focusing on my LLC and doing an art fellowship full-time. And that's been like incredibly liberating, just to be able to like spend my time surrounded by other folks that like either share the world in a similar lens, or at least like recognize the different ways that you can, which is really powerful. So I think that's just been like has been a huge influence, I think, for me. And I think in terms of my art, and I'll kind of dive into it a little bit further later, but that's really influenced too the way that it's manifested in what I create too.
Yeah. I have a side question with that.
Yeah.
And this might even fall as a rapid fire question, but so I think looking at that kind of like those rubrics and all that we have in mind, I have a really broad kind of sense of this is this. This also could be this. But then in other spaces, especially when it comes to food, I'm like, it's not shrimp and grits. There's no roux in there. Where's the
right.
So and I find like for a long time my favorite color has been gray. That's just like it's not this, so it's not that. It's not black and white.
That's true.
Do you have a favorite color, and do you see any connections to maybe your personality or some of the things that you've discovered, and maybe those things relate? Do you have something that's like that, or?
It's really interesting that you say that, because one of the things that I've explained to people, because inevitably you get those reactions of people being like, I would never think that you were blah, 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 right? And they say it about literally everything. I never would have thought you were gay. I never would have thought you were, it's just like about everything they have to put their own 2 cents in, right? So in terms of like the, one of the things that I've explained to people, I was having a conversation with another friend that was kind of questioning their own kind of thought processes and relation to neurodivergence. And we were thinking about like, the way I picture it is almost like, remember there's like photo collages and everything, and like, so everything, you zoom out, it looks like just a black and white photo, or just like gray kind of scale photo. And I feel like for me, a lot of my experiences, so backtrack for a second. When I got the diagnosis, there were certain things I didn't realize were not other people's realities. So like my lens has always been my lens. So if that's the only thing you have to compare it to, a lot of times, like that's what you're going to assume other people's norms are, right?
Sure.
So like one of the questions had to do with like, you pick up mannerisms from other people or other like expressions or something like that. And I was like, well, yeah, that's the English language, right? Or like, that's just like human nature. You learn by observing and kind of mimicking. And my doctor kind of laughed, was like, oh, to a degree. And so I was thinking about like this mosaic kind of analogy, where I feel like my life, when it comes to certain like behaviors and like understanding how to react in certain situations, there's like this giant photo mosaic where like at any time I can zoom in on a picture of like what happened in a certain scenario and go, oh, that didn't work anything before. maybe I'll draw on this one. Oh, yep, this one, I'm going to do that, and it's almost like this giant, like, it looks from behind like there's this seamless spectrum, or not a spectrum, but just like, scale of this image that looks like, I guess, seamless, but it's really this intricate, like, collection of experiences that you learn from and then you can draw on. And that's actually where kind of sometimes neurodivergence is like superpower, because you can kind of like retrieve these things that you can call on later, and it's not really instinct. I didn't know people could just act on instinct. That sounds like sorcery to me, but I don't know. So anyway, okay. So sidetrack. There goes the ADHD part of me too. So color wise, I would say, purple has always been my favorite color. Teal has been drawing to me more and more, but it's really interesting depending on the mood. You know what I mean? And so I felt like I've been more connected to the shades in that sense, and just kind of like what that looks like as opposed to just what it feels like. Yeah.
Yeah. Burgundy for me, because I like to call it ox blood and say, oh, it's just the blood of my enemies.
I love that.
No, but I think it's funny. Sometimes I look at certain rooms that I'm in, and I kind of use the mosaic sort of. I kind of look at like, in terms of diversity, if I were to pixelate this room, how white is it or how black is it? I start doing that, and it's a preset for me. And I was like, should I be in this room? Am I the only piece of pepper here?
That's really interesting.
Oh yeah.
Now I'm going to do that. Now I'm going to be like thinking about like the spectrum of. I don't know.
I don't know if you're a coffee drinker or what have you, but go into a coffee shop and ask for your, it's colorism. I'm not going to say it's not, but ask for coffee at the complexion of your favorite celebrity that's black. So it's like, let me get that Bob Marley, which is like coconut milk and
I'm
like
totally
black coffee.
Try that.
Yeah, that's the way that I order coffee. Like,
that's amazing. Do people usually get it right? Like, let's be real. Like, yeah.
I only had one person get it right, and it was it was a person that was part of the tribe, part of it, and they were like, "That's really funny." I got you. I was like, "You got it, and you got it."
It's real because people are paying attention to like that person. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. So can you tell us more about your work and what are the main ideas that your work aims to express?
Sure. So in terms of let's see, where do I even start with it? So some of the things I'm going to start with talking about some of the things I randomly dabbled in terms of like art. So things that of course I didn't name as art because I didn't think that it qualified as art. But I guess I'd been kind of doing it all along. And so, so some of the things, I do wood burning, I do photography. I think a lot of my, my first kind of admission to some sort of artistry would be the photography. But then a lot of it is like crafting with just kind of various materials, which, in retrospect actually is kind of collage art anyway, but I just never really saw it as that. And then, all the way to like, I did some African dance and I did some drumming. I collect international percussion instruments, and then I did drag king performing once upon a time too. And so like all these different elements of me were just ways. They were all self-expression. They all kind of had a common thread of communicating some part of myself with the rest of the world. And what I've realized, I think I've known all along, but I think only recently I've been able to put words to, has been the idea that, I can't always rely on words as much as, I'm actually a logophile. I love words and I am really I love the intricacies of them. But when I'm mad or I'm upset or whatever, I cannot draw on them for shit, unless I'm writing, like if I'm writing like a heated letter, you can bet your ass I'm going to use like every, 4 or 5 syllable word, whatever. But for the most part, like I don't always have the words or I don't always have the social means to communicate things the way that I want them to. Yeah. And I'm routinely walking away from conversation being like, oh, I should have said this, or I should have, I'll probably email you like a novel of everything I probably forgot to mention in this too. But a lot of it is just my own way of connecting with the world when I don't always have the tools to do so. And I think that's something that I've carried a lot into my work with students, into my work with with my own kids and clients and stuff like that. Just that there's so many different ways you can express yourself. And that comes from a deep-rooted value. So it's not even just about self-expression, because part of the thing is, at a young age, and even depending on, different people's experiences, you can be a certain age and still feel like you don't know who you are to express. Right. And so it gives that kind of intangible element, but it also communicates the values that are, that you need to get out there. And that is all part of like who you are and who you're representing. So I know like a couple examples. One of them is, during the pandemic, I was one of the zillions that started a business and was like, hey, I'm going to do this or whatever. And at the time it was jewelry making, because I was, in the education world, when we were doing everything virtual, we were trying to get really creative about reaching our students and creating more safe virtual spaces for them. And it was a little bit trickier. It's not like you could, they could walk into my rainbow filled office or whatever, and students being limited to, this part of them or, the whatever they could see on the screen, were getting misgendered all the time. And so anyway, one day with my wood burning, I started making like pronoun jewelry, because for some reason we couldn't change the platform that we were using. We couldn't change our pronouns that we were using, or like even just the name that students were being referred to. So there was all kinds of like people not feeling like their identity was being acknowledged. So with the pronoun jewelry, at the very least, I could normalize pronoun sharing. I could make it available for others, because I started offering it to other people. And just like promoting this message of like visibility means volumes. So even in those like stupid meetings where you're like involuntarily muted, and you're just confined to this little image and it's like Brady Bunch scene or whatever, but you can't say anything, you can at least make a statement, and you can still feel like the core of who you are inside is still mattering outside. Yeah. So, that's one element of it. The other thing I started to realize is with one of the common experiences for people that are late diagnosed autistic is that you can feel like this questioning of who you are is like, am I just a mirror image of everybody I've seen? Am I just reflecting everything around me? Because historically, that's kind of supposedly the trend is, or not the trend, but like the pattern is that there's like a mimicking of your surroundings, right? Sure. So when you start like thinking deeper about it, you're going, well, who am I really at the core if I've really just matched other people's energies my whole life? And so I started, one of my friends, maybe a few months later after the diagnosis, had sent me an application to this arts integration art fellowship for artist teaching spot. And I started making a collage for it. And I was like, as I'm pulling little clips from like my own photography and things from a magazine and everything like that, I'm realizing like that's one of my favorite things to do, is to pick little pieces of what I appreciate the most and the things that I find valuable and the things that speak to me. And I put them together in a neatly arranged or like a very intentional arrangement, right? And then I started thinking like, this is going to sound super cheesy, but like, then I started thinking like, that actually is kind of what I am, right? So even if I am mimicking my surroundings, and even if I'm just portraying all of the things that I've seen and I've picked up along the way, it's still the art in which I've used them to arrange how I seem appropriate and how to communicate myself and everything. So not only did it validate me as an artist, but it kind of validated me as a piece of art, which automatically kind of opens up the doors for a lot of things,
Yes. And it's funny you say that. I talk to people and they're like, oh, so truth in this art. You talk about art. I was like, I am the art, and I say it with so much stank on it.
I love it.
But yeah, and I think in terms of normalizing things, and I'll put this out there where my partner, we were both working at a Jesuit college, and she put it out there, like just matter of factly. At the time, she was identifying as bisexual, and she's identifying as pansexual now. But she'd mentioned, she's like, "Yeah, I'm bi," and I was like, oh, "Okay, cool." And like, so what's for lunch? That was literally what my thing
Right.
was. Whereas every other person in there is clutching their pearls and looking for their collective pearls. I'm like, it's fine. Or even this notion of having like one's video up, and my day job is in higher ed, still in a different role in different university, but there was such a fight and a push in terms of like how we did data, as to, well, that's a deprecated field. It's like, then we should remove gender from these fields because it's deprecated. We don't need it.
Yeah.
I was like, is there a grant attached to this? Is there funding attached to it? Then I don't think anyone cares.
Right.
And even with like doing everything through like Zoom or some other app, you want to have that sort of stuff in there. But I think one of the things and one of the ways that I've seen people share messages without being overt about it is, touching on it, like having those pronouns up there in the screen when allowed, or even what's in the background.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, this book right here. It's just like, how not to be a dick, is the title of a book.
Oh, that's amazing. That's also my motto, by the way. Just don't be a dick. Like that's so.
Yeah. I remember I had an interview with an artist a while back, and they were non-binary, or they're non-binary, and I remember throwing out one of the goofiest jokes I had, because I like having bits that kind of fit, and it's like, it's not mean spirit, it's not bad, it's probably punish. Yeah. And I was like, they, them, thou. I was like, these are my pronouns, the old English pronouns, and they were like, you are stupid. I was like, I know. So could you tell us a bit about If I Knew Then Letters Project, and what was the thinking behind it?
Sure. So, I mean, even drawing back to the whole idea of like visibility, and even, like those things that we used to do, like especially during the pandemic, or even, well, maybe not right now because I'm in my 10-year-old's room. So you've got a 10-year-old's room, whatever that's worth, behind me. But the, in terms of, oh, see, I've already lost my. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure.
Edit that one out.
So tell us about the If I Knew Then Letters Project, and what was the thinking behind it?
Thank you. So with If I Knew Then, this whole idea of visibility. At the time I was teaching in high school. That was, in a moderate conservative county, I would say more than moderate, at least. And, our GSA, or Gender Sexuality Alliance Club, was, we had just gotten it up to being able to be coined as either gay straight alliance or gender sexuality alliance. It used to have to be covered as like, diversity club or whatever, and so we were kind of making these progressive steps. And one of the things that I was so kind of inspired by from all of my students is the amount of like self-awareness and passion that they had at like 14. Mm-hmm. And just, and this isn't meant to sound ageist in the sense of like, you don't expect, but like, I think about me as I didn't have my shit together. I didn't know where I stood on a lot of things, and I think I was just so impressed by like the willingness for them to just create the change that they wanted to see. Yeah. That, I wanted them to even deepen that knowledge. And I wanted them to see that like they're not the first wave of folks that have felt these things. And if combined, if you can combine that passion and that enthusiasm with like that timeless knowledge that kind of came before them, and connect them to that sense of belonging or that ancestry, that could be really powerful. And so what I did was I had LGBTQ adults, for whatever it's worth in terms of definition. I don't know what you can define an adult, but I guess like, out of, at past high school, maybe like in the early 20s or something like that, at least and up. And so, adults would write letters to their teenage selves, with the theme or even just the message of "If I Knew Then." And so, again, the intention was to help my students feel a little more supportive or supported and just feel like validated, but also give them kind of fuel them even more to like be that change that I know they were capable of. And then ironically though, I mean, they thought it was cool, as a lot of high schoolers do. You know, they're kind of like, oh, that's pretty cool, Miss Phoenix. And then they like moved on. But it was actually the letter writers that reached out to me with the most gratitude and the most reflection of just like, that was really cathartic. I really didn't expect feeling like that. Or I didn't know that I was that proud of my story, because I don't think a lot of us tell ourselves, like, I don't think we think back and give ourselves credit enough from where we've come from. And so that was really cool, because I think I've, you know, out of maybe like 50-ish letters that I've collected so far, the bulk of the letters, I mean, I would say probably 99% of our, 48 out of 49 or whatever the number is actually like, they were all more messages of, they weren't about like regret. They weren't about like, if I knew then I would have done this differently. They were more about like settling in for the ride, expecting the unexpected, and just kind of like understanding that you're going to get there when you're going to get there, and to like kind of tune into the present when you can, but also just kind of like getting through some of the temporary and bring with you kind of the resilience that's naturally going to come with it. So anyway, it was cool, because by the end of it, thought I was going to have all these like super inspired, charged high schoolers. I mean, they were still badasses, but like, then I also had these adults that were like feeling really good about themselves. And I think over the years, I've rewritten my own letter probably 7 times, and sometimes I've shared it, sometimes I haven't. But, it's really just about me and recognizing like the journey that I've come from, So that's been pretty cool. But the thing that I want to do with it ultimately is I want to turn it into an anthology. And, I even had a whole Kickstarter, and it's definitely still on my like docket of things to do, especially now that I'm focusing on my LLC more. I have a little more mental capacity to do that. My thing right now is trying to figure out like, I want to maybe couple those letters with art, and maybe with queer artists that are also kind of depicting that same message through their art, or maybe even teens, creation of art or something. I will keep you posted as to what that really looks like. But part of my intention, somebody said you should do portraits since I do photography. Yeah. And my only thing is I didn't want people to be limiting themselves to like who they look like in terms of when they read the letters. I want them to kind of see that this is timeless and, and still honor all the authors and have, an index and that kind of thing, but not be directly. I want for people to see that it really expands beyond borders.
Yeah, that's great. And I believe that this idea of writing and having and documenting and really being able to go through that sort of cathartic process is important. I find that writing things down has a lot of weight attached to it, because at times I kind of dabble with this idea of our conversations disposable, and I think that's ultimately why I led into doing a podcast. I think conversations, they're gone. And but I think if you record them, that's the way to get it. But, there are some people to believe that maybe you should write down conversations. Maybe you should document in that way, and transcripts and things of the sort. But I think as a person and going through a process and in really trying to heal and reminisce and even look back and think of like, I'm here. I got through that, and it's good. And I remember, this is ridiculous, but I remember a podcaster I really like. He found old tapes of him when he was a teenager, and he would play them on the podcast, and he would just make fun of himself like 20 years removed. He's like, I was a dick. I was stupid. It's like, look at me, all self-important. And it gives you like context or what have you, and it makes you kind of think back of, when you're down, like, I am good, or I am great, or what have you. And this kind of leads me into this last question, which is the amalgamation of things here. But I find that when entities that aren't really a part of a community or aren't really kind of doing that sort of work, they do things that feel a little more performative than like, this is what you want. It's like, but is it? I don't think I want that. I think I just want like, fair treatment, maybe something that feels equitable, maybe to be seen. Tell me about, for those who don't get it, how can we, like macroly, like people that's listening, like, hey, I don't know how to be more inclusive and more understanding. How can that, what would that look like from your lens?
So I know you said there's the last question, so I'm trying to figure out, do you want the soapbox answer or not? No. Whatever
one you want to shoot out there,
Yeah, no, I'll still try to keep it somewhat to the point. I will say that, there's a lot of buzzwords around diversity and inclusion. It started to almost put a bad taste in your mouth, because it winds up getting used incorrectly or inefficiently, and kind of like in a very performative way, like you said, kind of just checking boxes and just all these things. And I've actually had multiple clients say, can you just provide us with like a tips and tricks page? What can we do? And I can do that. But the truth is that's just kind of putting a Band-Aid on like a leak in like a giant dam. You know what I mean? It's really only going to buy you time while you do the real work, which is ultimately an introspection. And the hardest thing about that is like nobody wants to look at themselves at the time that they're trying to, get a better performance appraisal, or they're trying to grow their company, or they're trying to whatever. But until we're looking at like how each of us are kind of paying into the system that is keeping that oppression going and keeping people in these varying levels of survival, and just some people are thriving and some people are trying to keep their head above water. And if we're not looking at that, and we're not looking at like the underlying factors, that's the part that's kind of problematic. And so this idea of quick fixes or whatever is challenging for me. And so what I was, actually recently somebody asked if I would do like a 10 minutes on how they can be more LGBTQ inclusive. And
they're telling you to do stand up. Can you do a quick 10 minutes on
right.
Queers? It's like, what?
So I literally thought about for 10 minutes going, don't be a dick. Oof. Don't be a dick. Don't be a dick. I mean, like, how many ways can you possibly, because at the root of it, it's not going to change anything if we're not kind of looking at how we're paying into that system. And so, one of the things that I would say, I think it comes down to two elements. And like the biggest things I would say is like, yes, don't be a dick. That's the overall umbrella thing that I would like to scream from the rooftops. It is. I mean, it all can kind of fit under there. But more specifically is like honor individuals' experiences. It is so amazing how many people just, they're not putting the human element to it. And, one of the things I know I've been asked before too, is just kind of this, how does storytelling talk about activism? And I think it's that idea of like connecting people's experiences to what's really matter, or like what's going to move us forward as a community. And without that, like humanistic, without that personal experience, you can't actually develop that empathy, that caring, that whatever, that is rooted or like is required in order for change. So, because it's super easy for people to just turn their backs if they don't know anybody or they've never heard anybody experience something themselves. But that's just not like, that's what we need to move away from. And most of the best like rebellions and revolutions have been built on the back of people's individual stories. So that's kind of where a lot of my storytelling is like so integral in my art. Whether people appreciate it or not, I realize I'm still telling the story, So yeah, I would say it's kind of honor people's experiences, break down some of the norms, make sure that people are not, by setting norms, things like, preparing students to act as neurotypical as possible, which is super damaging, is, that in itself creates that anything outside of that is abnormal, and it's very alienating. Having this gender binary kind of system where students are getting, emergency contact forms that say mother and a father, or they're constantly saying mommy and daddy in classroom or whatever. My kid was, not until kindergarten that my oldest son realized that it wasn't normal to have two moms. And that was a school doing it, not anybody else. So, like there's a lot of power in just redefining that there's, we don't have to adhere to these kind of outdated norms that are in turn alienating. And then we're having to put out these fires that we created, So.
Yeah, it's, I thank you. Thank you for sharing that because I think they're not huge changes, but they can be powerful changes. Like when you say, mother, father, whatever, that I don't have any kids. So it's kind of one of those things, but it's kind of like you could just be parent one or other parent or what have you. That's not much
or like
work that needs to
emergency
be done there.
contact, family member, guardian, that kind of thing. And and let's face it, how many students are like having that like nuclear family structure these days anyway? Like no matter what, you know what I mean? Like just people are living with all different kinds of family members, and like there's a lot of norms that are placed on it, which then perpetuate the stigma that are keeping that kind of divide there.
Yeah, and even looking back at it, you kind of caused me to think about it because we're about the same age, and this thing of, oh, you don't have both parents. It's like, you got to have both parents filled. It's like, I have both of mine. This person might not, but there is someone there, and in kids, or in my experience, kids are honest. And they don't have that filter yet of they're going to talk behind your back. I'm like, yo, why you got both parents?
Right.
Like, yo, can you not ask me that? Can you act like
exactly. And that's the great thing is like, I go from something like the kindergarten incident of, my son first getting this idea of what's not normal. Fast forward to a few years later, and both him and his younger brother are like rushing home excitedly to tell me that they have a non-binary teacher at school, and they like say their name just like so fluidly, where I hear teachers like, or other adults like say the word mix as in like they're tripping over a curb with coffee in their hand. I mean, it's so unnatural for some reason for adults, but the kids are just so like, they get it and they're excited about it, and they're excited about that change. And I think it just goes to show that like kids are the ones that are very capable. I think we kind of get stuck in our own kind of haunches or whatever, and I'm sure I've got my own short-sighted elements of me, but, I think we could just kind of, I guess, see outside ourselves as like a really powerful movement. But that's hard. I guess people are takes a lot more warming up to that idea.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I've encountered is, that notion of don't be a dick, it kind of floats on both sides a little bit, where it's just like, all right, this is a new person. Mm-hmm. They can mess up. And now if they continually mess up, then they're just being a dick. But if they mess up that initial time, like, don't lose it, because unfortunately, for better or worse, in some instances, you might be the only person they've met that falls within it, that sort of like set and has that sort of like background. That's their reference point. And it's just like a situation. So, that's kind of what that is. And I remember I looked at it because, I get bios from people and stuff. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, you haven't updated your bio. It's like, you're not going about those pronouns. Can you update your bio so I don't come off looking like a dick?
I had like 3 different thoughts all at the same time. It's like, which one do I go with? Because I know we're running short on time too. No, but I was going to say, I think there's like a lot of just the idea that certain institutions, when it comes to, and this is like kind of related, but it kind of goes back a couple minutes what we were talking about, but just in terms of like, one of the things that like I've had to draw for myself creatively, or a boundary I've drawn for myself creatively, has just been this idea of, not stifling a student's identity as themselves. You know what I mean? And that was something else I've noticed in like some schools and not others. And I'm just really appreciative of seeing that when it's able to play out, and even just like having schools where, I probably sound like I'm promoting my kids' school, but it's actually just the fact that they're not centering these, the curriculum. They're actually looking at the curriculum. They're recognizing that you can do all these other changes, but if you're not looking at the fact that like all of your characters, all your antagonists, all your events are based on like cisgender straight white males, and you know what I mean? So there's like all these just different elements. I think it's just, I would also want to tell people to just pay attention a little bit more to, you know, what is being represented and whether students can see themselves in that work, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I always look for like the chunky protagonist. It's like, yo, where is the 6'4", 300-pound black guy? He's got glasses. He does a podcast. It's like, you're just looking for yourself in all of these things.
Right, exactly.
But in a sense, we are looking for that. We're looking for someone that we connect to and we can relate with, and going to it. A lot of these classics and a lot of these things that are in schools that are part of the curriculum, we, you know, don't feel represented in there. Even, you know, something as, you know, having not the multi sort of hyphenated sense, but kind of like, I'm a black male, cisgendered, what have you. And it's like, I don't feel represented in that. So someone that has much more and a much more fuller, richer kind of identity that they're presenting, I can imagine how they definitely don't feel represented.
Right.
And there has to be efforts to either bring in sort of work that's representative of that and really vet that stuff. Do a better job of being able to vet what's appropriate and what represents in terms of, is this scholarly? Does this fit these other criterias? Subject matter aside, does it fit these criterias?
Right.
And let's go from there.
Yeah. No, I think that's really powerful. And that's where, you know, I'm loving that this fellowship, and then even just working on my LLC is giving me a chance to focus on like just supporting in ways where, you know, I'm not having to fix everybody's problems, but I can at least provide some guidance as to like, where are some missed opportunities, you know, and really kind of, you know, the fellowship is about arts integration. So it's a chance to kind of like infuse more perspectives where, you know, that curriculum has not changed too much since we've grown up, you know, and it really is a way to kind of build in more perspectives that are otherwise not being shared enough with the students.
Well, there you have it. And thank you, because now it's that part where all of the goodwill we've established here and kind of talking about inclusivity and just better ways of thinking. I'm going to go to the wayside now because I got a couple rapid fire questions for you.
Yeah, go for it.
Don't overthink them. Don't overthink them. I tell it to everybody. Don't overthink them. Brevity is key. When are you most productive? Like, is it a time during the year? Like, I'm most productive in the summer because I'm inside because it's hot as balls outside. Or I'm super productive in the morning because no one is up or everyone is gone. When are you most productive?
I would definitely say more in the morning. In terms of time of day, more in the morning. Emotionally, I've figured out that the most creative side of me, the most verbose when it comes to writing and all that kind of stuff, is when I'm charged up and I'm mad. And it's so funny because it's like, I'm not trying to like tune into negativity, but sometimes that like reminds me like what those things are, like what are my responses, you know what I mean? And so it's a way to get out those creative juices. And so sometimes, you know, it might be in response to something, or it might be something that I have to kind of dive into and go, okay, if I don't do this, what could happen, or might, you know, what has been somebody's response before? And it helps me actually formulate how I would present that training differently, you know? So time of day, definitely morning, but emotional. Yeah. I like to be a little fired up.
I dig it. What is your oldest possession?
Ooh, that is a good one. Maybe so I do have a book of poetry. I have this binder of poetry and drawings, and some of these drawings, no joke, date back to like when I was 9 years old. And so they're not my highest quality whatsoever. But it's really funny because there's also little doodles in the corner of just like, you know, I'm sure crushes I had at the time or whatever the case is. And it kind of just, it to me gives a little bit of timeline of like, what did I care that much about before? Because I'm sure I was not as world knowledgeably, whatever the case is now, you know, at 14 or something. That's probably one of my oldest possessions.
And this is the last one I have because I'm very, very interested in what people eat, especially creatives. What is your favorite sandwich?
Hands down, and it might just be because I just had it. There's, can I say a restaurant's name on here? Okay, so Neapol, the smokery, whatever.
What sandwich?
It's their salmon BLT. Have you ever had it?
Yes, it's my favorite sandwich there.
to die for. It was combine that with the cardamom lemonade every once in a while. Although I got to tone back on that because like I'm sure lemonade's got a lot of sugar, but like the two of them combined are just like the best. I don't know. I only reward myself with that. And that was like my hype myself up kind of meal that I had right before this actually. So yeah, definitely recommend that one.
But there you have it. That's great. That's a really good sandwich actually. Yeah. So with that, I want to thank you for being on this podcast. And two, I want to invite and encourage you to tell the fine folks where to check you out, your work, all of that good stuff. The floor is yours.
Absolutely. Okay, so one, I suck at self-promotion. Like I joke with one of my friends about this all the time where I'm like, yeah, I hope people just find it. But I guess I need to, and I'm focusing on my independent stuff more full time. I should. So I do have a website called phoenixoutspoken.com. And that name was inspired by I had a boss one time tell me I couldn't be part of a task force because my voice was too strong. And I was like, all right, well, let's go. Let's make my brand off of this. So yeah, I told you that emotion just like revs me. No, I would say, yeah. So the website, phoenixoutspoken.com, or I have like multiple Instagrams that I'm hoping to dwindle down to one now that I can actually kind of recognize, artistry can kind of cover a lot of things. So I've got my Phoenix Rising Photography, my Phoenix Flare Creations, and then I've got my If I Knew Then .com or whatever, and If I Knew Then Instagram. So lots of different ways. I don't even know how to like narrow it down, but guess follow one of those and I guess you'll figure it out soon. No, probably Phoenix Outspoken is probably the best way to follow me because I'm going to start updating the blog a little bit more and stuff like that. So
and there you have it, folks. I want to again thank Alyssa Fenix for coming on to the podcast and speaking with me. And for Alyssa Fenix, I'm Rob Lee, saying that there is art, community, connection, inclusivity in and around your neck of the woods. You just got to look for it.